What you are about to hear actually happened. It was not a war crime thriller. It was not a horror film. It was a government program, funded, staffed, and protected by one of the most powerful militaries in the world. And when it was over, the men responsible walked free. Not because they were innocent, because what they knew was too valuable to punish. This is the story of Unit 731, and it is the darkest chapter in the history of modern science. In 1936, the Imperial Japanese Army quietly constructed a massive complex in Pingfang, a rural district outside the city of Harbin in occupied Manchuria, northeastern China. From the outside, it resembled an industrial facility. It had its own railway line, its own power plant, its own water supply, its own airport. It covered 6 square kilometers. It housed over 3,000 Japanese personnel at its peak. Its official name was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army. Its real purpose had nothing to do with preventing disease. The man behind it was Lieutenant General Shirō Ishii, a physician, a military officer, and a man whose ambition had no boundary that medicine or morality could contain. Ishii had spent years arguing to Japanese military leadership that biological weapons were the future of warfare. Chemical weapons had proven effective in World War I. Biological weapons, Ishii believed, could be far more devastating and far cheaper to produce. All you needed were the right bacteria, the right delivery systems, and human beings willing to die so you could learn. He had no shortage of the first two. For the third, he looked at the prisoners. The victims of Unit 731 were called maruta by the Japanese personnel. The word means logs, as in pieces of wood, raw material, something to be used and discarded. They were primarily Chinese civilians and prisoners of war, men, women, and children taken from occupied territories. There were also Soviet prisoners, Korean civilians, and a small number of Allied POWs. They were transported to the Pingfang complex by rail in sealed cars, told they were being relocated. They were never relocated. What happened inside Unit 731 was not science in any meaningful definition of the word. It was systematic torture, dressed in the language of research to make it feel purposeful to the people conducting it. Prisoners were infected with plague, cholera, typhoid, and anthrax, not to find cures, but to measure how quickly these diseases killed, how they progressed through the human body, and what doses were required to guarantee death. Vivisections, surgery performed on living, conscious human beings, were conducted to examine the progression of disease in organs in real time. Anesthesia was frequently withheld, not because it was unavailable, but because researchers believed it would interfere with results. Frostbite experiments were conducted by forcing prisoners to stand outside in sub-zero temperatures with their limbs exposed until the tissue froze solid. The frozen limbs were then thawed, sometimes in hot water, sometimes over open flame, while researchers documented the process of tissue death. Survivors of these experiments were subjected to them again. Pressure chamber experiments measured how much atmospheric pressure the human body could withstand before blood vessels burst. Prisoners were placed in centrifuges and spun at increasing speeds. They were injected with horseblood, seawater, and industrial chemicals to test the reactions. They were deliberately infected with syphilis. They were exposed to lethal doses of X-ray radiation. None of the prisoners subjected to these procedures were ever released. When a subject had been used to the point where they could provide no further research value, they were executed and cremated. The ashes were disposed of on the facility grounds. Estimates of the total number killed inside Unit 731 and its affiliated facilities range from 3,000 to over 10,000 people. Unit 731 was not only a research facility, it was a weapons production operation. Ishii and his team developed plague bombs, ceramic containers filled with infected fleas designed to shatter on impact and release the fleas into the population below. They developed anthrax bombs, cholera bombs. They conducted field tests, deploying biological agents over Chinese cities and villages, from aircraft to measure real-world effectiveness. Historical analysis of disease outbreak patterns in occupied China during the 1930s and 1940s suggests these field tests may have killed hundreds of thousands of civilians, though the deliberate nature of those outbreaks was hidden for decades beneath the chaos of wartime. By 1945, Unit 731 had produced enough biological agent to kill millions of people. Ishii had developed plans, never executed, for biological attacks on the continental United States, using plague-infected balloons carried across the Pacific by the jet stream. When the Soviet Union declared war on Japan in August 1945 and began advancing into Manchuria, Ishii received orders to destroy the facility and eliminate all evidence. The buildings were dynamited, documents were burned, and the remaining prisoners, several hundred people, were executed in the final days before the Soviet forces arrived. Ishii and his core team fled to Japan. They brought their data with them. Here is where the story becomes something beyond a war crime. When American occupation forces arrived in Japan after the surrender, they discovered what Unit 731 had done. General Douglas MacArthur personally oversaw the investigation. What his investigators found was clear. Ishii and his team had conducted systematic human experimentation on a massive scale. Under the laws of the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, which was prosecuting Japanese leaders for exactly these kinds of atrocities, they should have been tried and executed. Instead, the United States government made a decision. The biological weapons data that Unit 731 had compiled, years of human experimentation that could never be ethically replicated, was considered too valuable to lose. American military researchers believed the data on plague, anthrax, cholera, and frostbite effects in humans would give the United States a significant biological weapons advantage against the Soviet Union in the emerging Cold War. A secret deal was made. Ishii and his team provided their complete research data to American authorities. In exchange, full immunity from prosecution, no trials, no prison, no accountability of any kind. Shirō Ishii, the man who ran the most extensive human experimentation program outside Nazi Germany, lived freely in Japan until his death from throat cancer in 1959. Many of his Unit 731 colleagues went on to distinguished careers in Japanese medicine, academia, and business. Several became leaders of major pharmaceutical companies. The United States government suppressed its knowledge of Unit 731 for decades. The deal remained classified until the 1990s, when Japanese and American historians, working from declassified documents, finally pieced together the full story. The question that Unit 731 forces us to confront is one that has no comfortable answer. At the Nuremberg trials, the principle was established clearly. There is no data obtained through human experimentation that science is permitted to use, regardless of its value. The Nazi doctors who conducted experiments in concentration camps were tried, convicted, and executed. Their data was ruled inadmissible, not just legally but morally. To use it would be to give the victims' deaths a purpose they never consented to. It would transform murder into research. The United States made a different calculation for Unit 731. The men who turned human beings into logs, who froze children's arms and infected prisoners with plague, and opened living bodies without anesthesia, were given immunity in exchange for paperwork. Here at Ancient Atlas, we don't tell you this story to shock you. We tell you because the victims of Unit 731, the thousands of men, women, and children who died in Pingfang, were never given a trial, never given a memorial, never given an accounting that matched the scale of what was done to them. The least history can do is say their story out loud and refuse to look away.